On this Wednesday night, new charges against the former officers involved in the killing of George Floyd.
We want justice for what's going on.
One has a murder charge upgraded. 3 other fired officers are now charged too.
We got all 4!
Paused since the pandemic, the mission to get Canada's military back in motion. Long-term solutions to long-term care, the changes home operators and unions want. And Montreal flips out.
Aïe, 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 ça c'est l'expérience.
I love it.
The unexpected guest who swam into town.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. A big development tonight in the United States, something protesters in cities across the country have been demanding for more than a week.
We got all 4! We got all 4! We got...
In Minneapolis, near the spot where George Floyd died, they cheered and held up 4 fingers, one for each officer who has now been charged. 3 former Minneapolis officers, 2 who pinned him down by kneeling on his back, and a 3rd who watched, are now charged with aiding and abetting murder. They'd already been fired. And the former officer who kneeled on Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes while he pleaded with them, saying, "I can't breathe," has had the murder charge against him elevated.
As trying this case will not be an easy thing. Winning a conviction will be hard, and we are going to be working very hard and relying on each other and our investigative partners and the community to support that endeavor. George Floyd mattered. He was loved. His family was important. His life had value, and we will seek justice for him and for you.
Floyd's family calls it a bittersweet moment. His son and other family members visited the makeshift memorial to Floyd in Minneapolis. They've pleaded for the protests to be peaceful. What feels like a defining moment in America is still evolving. People are still taking to the streets. Curfews in place last night did not deter tens of thousands of people. The question now is that all 4 officers are charged. Will the mood change? Former President Barack Obama held a virtual town hall today. Here's part of what he said about the protests.
They're the result of a long history of slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and institutionalized racism that too often have been the plague, this original sin of our society.
The new charges in Minneapolis are a big step. And in Washington today, there was another one. The American Defense Secretary says he does not support President Trump's plan to use the Insurrection Act to mobilize troops. Jackson Proskow is near the White House again tonight.
As the sun rose on another tense morning, police and federal agents lined streets near the White House,
Black Lives Matter!
preparing for another uncertain day of protest. Tuesday brought the largest, most peaceful demonstrations to date. Thousands united in the memory of George Floyd, defying curfew, gathering in spite of the presence of security forces deployed on the president's orders.
Why is he spending money on that type of resources instead of taking care of what we're asking him to? He's not listening.
Nationwide, 30,000 members of the National Guard have been called up. The show of force in Washington involves an unprecedented federal security operation. What's so highly unusual about this situation is that these officers are not wearing name tags or even badges. It's hard to identify what agency they even work for. And there's dissent in the ranks. The Secretary of Defense is pushing back against President Trump's heavy-handed threats to deploy the military to other cities, still gripped by violence and looting.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
Overnight, protests turned ugly in Portland and Charlotte. In New York, thousands were trapped on the Manhattan Bridge after defying curfew. Whether the protests across the U.S. will come to a peaceful end still seems to be anyone's guess. And as this peaceful protest builds outside the White House tonight ahead of an 11 p.m. curfew, there's a back and forth over the U.S. troops that were ordered to the Washington area to potentially move into the city. Earlier today, we had heard that they were being sent back to their home bases without ever being deployed. Tonight, Defense Secretary Mark Esper has reversed that decision. They will remain in the region on standby in case they're needed. Donna?
Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. Thousands of people marched through the heart of London today, showing their solidarity. They marched from Hyde Park to Parliament Square, chanting Black Lives Matter, demanding justice for George Floyd, but also saying the UK is not immune to racism and inequality.
You keep killing us, that's why we're angry. How would you feel if I killed your brother? That's how we feel. How would you feel if then I killed your sister and you never got justice? What would you want to do?
The deaths are terrible, but this is something that has been going on for years. This is something that's been going on for my whole life. This is something that's been going on for my parents' whole life.
It's about making change in our community.
Hundreds of people are gathering in Calgary to show solidarity for victims of police brutality and racism. Their demonstrators are now marching through downtown. They'll hold a candlelight vigil at Calgary City Hall later tonight. The arrest of a man in Kelowna, BC on Saturday that was caught on camera has sparked an internal review. In the video, 2 RCMP officers are seen on either side of a man they've apprehended. A third officer runs in and punches the man in the head a number of times. The RCMP says the video does not show the full incident, particularly what happened leading up to this moment. It began with a report of a suspicious vehicle and an alleged impaired driver in a parking lot in Kelowna's downtown core.
I recognize that the tactics seen in the video are shocking to many people. When the third officer arrived, he observed that the man was still resisting arrest. In order to gain control of the situation, he was struck several times and then taken to the ground and handcuffed.
The RCMP says it's conducting a thorough internal review that will determine the duty status of that third officer. The search and recovery of that missing Canadian military helicopter and the remains of the force's members on board is now over. The Cyclone helicopter went down on April 29th off the coast of Greece, killing all 6 Canadian service members on board. It was involved in a photo shoot and was returning to land on HMCS Fredericton when it went down. Witnesses from the ship were able to help pinpoint the location of the wreckage 3,000 meters under the water. The military says no portion of the main cabin was left intact. Pieces of the helicopter were found in clusters over a large debris field. Some human remains were also recovered.
While we were able to recover remains of some of our fallen, it is important to note that we have not yet identified these remains, and I cannot tell you whether we have found everyone.
The remains will be returned to Canada this weekend for forensic identification. Family will be notified of the findings first, and then the public. Investigators are still piecing together what went wrong. Hundreds of soldiers are deployed here at home, working in long-term care homes, and thousands of others are waiting. Because of the pandemic, they've been told to stay home and stay healthy. Now, after months, the Canadian Armed Forces says it needs to get them moving, or they risk losing some of their essential skills. Mercedes Stephenson explains.
COVID-19 ground the Canadian military machine to a halt for all but the most vital of national defence and overseas operations. Troops ordered out of the field and off of the rifle ranges, all to stop the invisible enemy of the novel coronavirus from spreading within the military and taking out the troops. But after months of only patrolling as far as their backyards, concerns about losing operational readiness and becoming combat ineffective are driving the military back to work. An internal military memo obtained by Global News documents the concerns, saying it's time to come back to work despite the threat of the pandemic, because the military's capacity has been progressively eroded by the cancellation of Canadian Armed Forces training and force generation activities, and that the forces need to get back on track in order to prevent the excessive erosion of Canadian Armed Forces readiness. A senior military official told Global News the military is planning a slow, phased approach to getting back in the saddle. The first activities to resume will be recruiting, individual training, and battle school courses to teach trades and skills. Troops will be required to be 2 meters apart at all times, and if that's not possible, to wear personal protective equipment. Canadian military aircraft will be used to fly troops in where possible. And as personnel return to bases, they'll have to self-isolate for 2 weeks with no contact with civilians to make sure they don't have COVID-19. Defense analyst David Perry says the military has to reactivate because of the nature of their jobs.
There's simply too many things that the military does that you can't do from your home office or your kitchen. Training, things like firearms training, pretty difficult to do in your living room. There's all kinds of aspects of the way that the military works as an organization that requires you to be in an actual facility.
Donna, June 1st has always been the deadline that the military knew they had to come back because after that they risked compromising their ability to be able to defend the country or operate overseas. One of their first priorities will be making sure that those who are about to ship out have completed their training.
Mercedes, what about the soldiers working in the long-term care homes in Quebec and Ontario, overwhelmed by COVID-19? Do we know how many have tested positive?
We know that 41 overall have tested positive, but here's an important fact with that number. They've only tested those who are symptomatic, so we don't know the total numbers. But here's a bit of the breakdown from numbers we do have from the Department of National Defence. In Quebec, 1,000 Canadian soldiers are working in long-term care homes. 26 of them have been diagnosed. That gives you an infection rate of 2.6%. In Ontario, the numbers are much higher in terms of percentage. While there are only 150 troops in the homes, 15 have been diagnosed with COVID-19, and that is a 10% infection rate. The good news here, Donna, is that most of those soldiers have recovered.
All right, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thank you. Those long-term care homes have been the epicenter of COVID-19 outbreaks in Canada. This week, we're looking at why some are failing their residents and how conditions can be improved. Tonight, Ross Lord examines possible future models for this country's 2,100 long-term care facilities and the role the federal government might play.
As attention turns to preparing for a possible second wave of COVID-19, there's a new demand for the federal government. It comes from long-term care home operators in Ontario.
Ensuring there are supplies of personal protective equipment, focusing on rapid testing and prioritizing long-term care for rapid testing and turnaround.
The group that speaks for operators says there are roughly 76,000 seniors in Ontario long-term care homes for 79,000 available beds, with another 36,000 on the wait list and demand forecast to double over the next 13 years. The operators are calling on the federal government to help create another 147,000 beds. Others call for different federal action, placing long-term care under the Canada Health Act, like hospitals are. A move that could force provinces and territories to share more information on the condition of their homes.
And not simply just say, just give us more money and let us do our own thing. No. Sorry, we saw what happens when we do that. Now we're going to play a different game. It's a game called accountability. It's called a game called standards.
Those standards have been elusive in long-term care, where the ratio of nurses to residents often depends on how understaffed a home is at any given time. Even the concept of a minimum standard of care is a revealing term to those who studied it.
Who would go get your brakes fixed and say, are these minimum standards to get my brakes fixed? I mean, you're going to say, is this thing at the highest level of safety and quality that I'm looking for? So even that terminology I always found interesting.
Shirley Sharkey agrees with labor unions who demand residents receive more attention, 4 hours of care per day on average, depending on individual needs. Some standards are increasing, like Quebec offering higher salaries to recruit 10,000 long-term care workers. Federal officials say they're committed.
What we have learned has been happening cannot continue. We have to make it better, and we will.
There are no specifics on how, only a promise to transform long-term care with the cooperation of provinces and territories who are ultimately in charge of delivering health care. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
It was off, now it's on again. Coming up, why the World Health Organization has resumed trials of the drug hydroxychloroquine. A beautiful moment for some recovering COVID-19 patients in Barcelona, Spain. They were wheeled out of the hospital to the seaside. It's part of a program to humanize intensive care units. Tuesday was the second day in a row no deaths were reported from COVID-19 in Spain. For the first time in Canada, a team of Toronto researchers is preparing to conduct large-scale tests looking for people with COVID-19 antibodies. The test kits are being mailed to thousands of Canadians starting this week. The results could shed light on a range of unanswered questions, including how many Canadians have been infected and how long their immunity to the virus might last. Jeff Semple explains.
I've had flus before, but this one was unique.
Brenda Reiferscheid is a former nurse at this Saskatchewan hospital. She had her flu shot last winter, but back in February, she and several family members got sick.
I had night sweats, I was coughing, I was short of breath, identical symptoms to what COVID has.
Left wondering whether it was indeed COVID-19. And the answer is now within reach.
We hope to get out a few thousand kits this week itself.
This Toronto doctor and his team are preparing a special delivery.
So the kit comes in a package like this.
10,000 of these testing kits to be mailed to randomly selected Canadians to check for COVID-19 antibodies.
You can do this by giving a few drops of blood at home.
This instructional video shows how. A quick finger prick and 5 drops of blood onto this test paper, which is then mailed back to the lab. Samples containing COVID-19 antibodies reveal a past infection.
We'll be able to get really a profile of the virus in Canada, how many people infected, at what ages.
And whether they experienced any symptoms.
That'll give us a feel for how many people were asymptomatic or maybe just had really mild symptoms.
Some countries, such as the US, have been offering these antibody tests for months already. But Canada has taken its time.
A lot of tests are getting emergency use authorization without undergoing the full rigor.
Dr. Vathini Kolasingham says the market has been flooded with more than 200 different tests, many producing questionable results.
An unreliable test is worse than no test result at all.
Her lab is carefully evaluating the different tests, 2 of which have now been approved by Health Canada to be used in the study. The results are expected by early August, and researchers then plan to test the same group again later on to determine if the antibodies last or if COVID-19 can infect again. Donna?
Jeff Semple in Toronto, thanks. The World Health Organization is resuming its clinical trial of hydroxychloroquine as a potential treatment for COVID-19. It was suspended last week to conduct a safety review. The WHO says that review indicates no reason to discontinue the trial. The drug is approved for use in treating arthritis and malaria. There's hope it might be useful as a treatment for COVID-19. The U.S. president says he took it himself, despite potential dangerous side effects and no proof it's effective. Also today, a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine revealed hydroxychloroquine is not effective in preventing COVID-19 in people exposed to the virus, and that it is no better than a placebo. Still ahead, Canada's largest telecom companies shut Huawei out of their 5G networks. Huawei's plan to install its technology in Canada's 5G network is in doubt. All 3 of Canada's largest telecom companies are turning their backs on the Chinese telecoms company. TELUS revealed it's opting for Ericsson, based in Sweden, plus the Finnish company Nokia. It did that shortly after BCE, the parent company of Bell, revealed it intends to go with Ericsson technology for its 5G system. Rogers has already teamed up with Ericsson to roll out its 5G network. It's a major snub to Huawei, the world's biggest supplier of telecoms equipment. The company is facing scrutiny over security concerns linked to its close relationship with the Chinese government. For months, the federal government has been reviewing whether to ban Huawei from installing Canada's 5G technology. A decision is long overdue. Next, the rare visitor stuck in the spotlight in Montreal. This next story is something you don't see every day. A humpback whale has made it all the way up the St. Lawrence River to Montreal. That's the furthest a humpback is ever known to have traveled up the river. There is concern about its health, but the mammal is a huge attraction for whale watchers, as Mike Armstrong explains.
Mommy, where do I look? What this crowd has come to see seems impossible.
The thing is, I didn't believe it. I saw it on Facebook first. I'm like, that's a fake post for sure. They just put a picture, it's like, oh, a whale in Montreal. Oh, over there, wow.
No, it's not a hoax.
You see, guys?
There is a humpback whale in Montreal's Old Port. Popping out of the water every 25 to 45 seconds,
I saw it.
It has turned into quite an attraction.
The best thing I have seen since COVID-19 started here.
Now, why does Montreal have this strange visitor, a 9.5-meter long humpback in the shadow of downtown? We don't know if it's male or female, but young males in particular, experts say, can be foolishly adventurous. It appears to be 2 or 3 years old and could have been following prey, looking for a mate or a new feeding ground. It could also just be lost.
It could be that the whale is disoriented. It's hard to know, but it could be there for a while.
From its first spottings a week ago, the whale has traveled hundreds of kilometers upriver against the current. It's now at a dead end. It can't go further up the St. Lawrence from this spot. All it has in front of it are rapids on one side and the locks of the St. Lawrence Seaway on the other. The question is, how do you coax a whale to turn around? There have been cases in other countries where they've tried scaring them with the sounds of predators, orcas.
It never really worked well. Sometimes it worked for a day and then the whale came back.
Well, over the last few days, the whale hasn't looked like it's had too many concerns. It's been very active at times. Food's not a problem. Humpbacks can eat fish and can fast for weeks at a time. The hope is it just gets bored, turns around, and heads back out to the ocean.
I thought it was photoshopped, honestly, when I first saw it. Whoa!
Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the Esplanade Riel footbridge in Winnipeg, named after Louis Riel. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to us. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.